What are FDNS site visits and how can you prepare for them as an employer of foreign national employees or as a foreign national employee yourself here in the United States? That's what we're talking about on today's episode of Live at Lunch. My name is Emily Sumner with Sumner Immigration Law. Let's get into it. So first of all, what is an FDNS site visit? A lot of employers recently, over the past several months, of course, have been asking me more and more questions about site visits, how to handle them, how to prepare for them, what to expect, what happens afterwards. Definitely great questions to be asking. It's important to understand, though, that there are multiple types of possible visits from government officials, even within the immigration realm. So there are possible government site visits for other immigration or other government agencies, of course, apart from immigration. We won't get into that because that's not my area of law. But even within the realm of immigration, there are different types of site visits that could potentially happen. So, for example, you could have a visit from ICE that could be to inspect your I-9 documents or to come visit a specific individual that they have questions or concerns about. It could be a Department of Labor audit. It could possibly be a Department of Justice visit. Or it could be an FDNS site visit, which is what we're talking about today. So FDNS stands for Fraud Detection and National Security. And it is a unit that is part of the Department of Homeland Security. The purpose of these visits, these FDNS site visits, is to verify the information that is submitted to USCIS. So the site visits can be tied to petitions that are for an H-1B visa classification, for the L1 classification, for the R1 classification. There are similar visits for individuals on STEM OPT. So all different types of visa classifications. And the reason for an FDNS site visit honestly is a lot of times unknown, right? A lot of times it is random. It can be triggered by things like, or more likely to happen perhaps, in situations where the foreign national worker is working at home or potentially at a third client work site. It can happen more for smaller employers or for employers who file a large number of H-1B petitions or Ls or whatever type of petition we're talking about. So really that's not overly helpful. The bottom line is if you are filing a petition with USCIS for one of these types of visa classifications, you should know that it is possible that an FDNS site visit will happen. And it's not anything to panic about. We're going to talk now about we've talked some about why these happen, but what to expect if and when a site visit happens, how to prepare for one, and what to expect afterwards. So what to expect. If an FDNS site visit happens, then it is almost always, if not always, unannounced. The FDNS officer will show up to the worksite location. So the worksite location could be the employer's office. So if you have a foreign national worker working at your office space, then they could come to your office. They could come potentially to the employers or to the employees rather home if they're working from home. I haven't had that happen firsthand so far, but it is within the realm of possibility. Or they could go to the third-party client site. So if your foreign national employer or employee rather is working at a third-party client site, they could go to that client site. Wherever the work site is, as it's listed on the LCA, is where the officer could go. And they could go to a combination of places. They could go to the work site if that's different from the employer's address, and then also go to the employer's address to check things out as well. So they will show up, if it's in person, they will show up almost always unannounced. They should show their ID to show who they are, perhaps have a business card, credentials associated with the Department of Homeland Security. They will probably ask for a tour of the facilities, a tour of the office space or of the third-party client site. I know that can get complicated, right? Because if it's at a third-party client site, you don't have much control as the employer as to how that's handled. The officer may ask questions, probably will ask questions, both of the employer and of the individual employee. So they can ask questions to verify that the information in the petition that was submitted to USCIS is accurate and still correct. So they can ask questions like, what are your job duties? What is your job title? What is your current salary? I've seen them ask, how did you hear about this job opportunity? They can ask about the worksite location, and they can ask those questions both of the employer and or of the employee. Most frequently, I see them ask those questions, similar types of questions, if not the same set of questions, to both the employer and the employee independently. They can also ask to look at documentation. They could ask to look at a copy of the petition that was filed. They could ask to look at the public access file. They could ask for pay stub information to show that the employee is being paid the proper wage. And they'll also look to make sure that the organization actually exists. So they can, that's a reason that they could ask for a tour. They may ask more general questions about the size of the company, when it was established, how many people work there at that particular site, if there are other locations, things like that, just to get an idea, to confirm that the petitioner is actually a true organization. It is possible, that's what to expect if the if the visit happens in person. It is possible for this to happen by phone and or by email. So I've seen it happen all three ways, in person, by phone, and by email. If you all, I haven't mentioned this, but if anybody watching either now live or catching the replay, if you have questions, put them in the comments and I'm happy to help if I can. But I've seen it happen all three ways, in person, by phone, or by email. If you have a situation where you have an FDNS quote site visit, an FDNS inquiry, let's say, that happens by email, then the best practice that I love for our clients to do is to let us know. As the immigration attorney representing our clients, our corporate clients and their employees, please let us know. We would love to be able to review that information that you're submitting to the officer beforehand. Everything has to be accurate, of course. It has to be true, but we want to review it to make sure that the information that we're providing is accurate information, it is what the officer is looking for, and that it is aligned with what we've submitted previously to USCIS. If it's a phone call situation, same thing. Please tell your immigration attorney. We would love to hear about that. We want to know when and if this type of thing is happening. That's really helpful information for us. And same thing that I said with the site visit, or the in-person site visit, I said that the officer could ask questions of both the employer and the employee. The same can happen if they call. And I've seen that happen just yesterday. We had a situation where an FDNS officer called our corporate client and asked questions, and they were trying to contact the employee but couldn't get into contact with them, which is, in that particular case, wasn't an issue because the person had their green card. Anyway, it can happen any number of ways, but please let us know. If you are answering questions, you can give the answers to the questions. If they call, you can give answers to the questions if you're comfortable doing that, but talk to your immigration attorney even before you have a site visit. Talk to your immigration attorney so that you can come up with a plan. Of course, none of this information is legal advice. It's for general educational purposes only, and to let you know kind of what to expect. So you should come up with a plan as to how you're going to respond, which is a good segue to the next section of this live at lunch, which is how to prepare. So again, this is just general information, general things that you could consider. But I would recommend that you designate a person at the company who is going to be your representative, your company representative for an FDNS site visit. So there should be one person designated, perhaps a backup person as well. And everyone in the company that an immigration officer might come into contact with should know that that person is the point of contact, or those people are the point of contact. So you probably don't want the receptionist answering questions of the FDNS officer, not because they would, intentionally do anything wrong, just because they don't necessarily have access to all the information that the officer is going to be asking for. So it's important that you have a person designated, a point of contact designated, perhaps a backup point of contact, that those individuals know that they should contact the immigration attorney if and when this happens, and that everybody that the officer might come into contact with, to the extent possible, knows how to respond and who to direct the immigration officer to. So there should be training around that. You should do that in coordination with HR, and if you have a legal department, and of course your immigration attorney. If and when there is a person that comes on site, you should confirm their identity, get their business card, of course, and confirm their credentials with Department of Homeland Security. Look at their credentials to see that they actually are from Department of Homeland Security. They may, like I said earlier, they may request a tour of the facilities just to make sure that it's a true operating business. Like I said, they may ask questions of the employer and they might ask questions of the employee. So as I said, there should be a designated contact person who is familiar with, you don't have to memorize, the contents of every petition that you've ever filed for sure, but you should have a designated person who knows the ins and outs, the person who kind of oversees immigration for your company, who's able to answer basic questions about the position, about the petition that was submitted, things like the job title, the job duties, the salary. And again, you don't need to necessarily memorize anything, but be able to have access to that so that the information that you give is consistent with what was submitted to USCIS. And that information should also be consistent with what's actually happening. So if there are discrepancies, that can be a red flag, and we'll talk about that in more detail in just a minute. As I said, they also could ask the employee information. So the employee likewise should be, if you have foreign national employees, they should be given a heads up. They should know that something like this may happen, that they may be contacted by phone, email, or an in-person visit, and that they should be able to give the basic information about their position, things like job title, salary, worksite location, how did you find the job, things like that. And that information should be A, accurate, and B, consistent with what was submitted to USCIS. The officer may also ask to look at the public access file if it's an H-1B petition or other petition that requires an LCA, labor condition application. So you should, as an employer, have that information available and accessible for, to be able to show to an officer if they request that information. I said a minute ago that it can be a red flag if there are inconsistencies, and that's true. You want to make sure as an employer, an employee, for a national employee, that the information that you submit to USCIS, the information that you give at a site visit, and the information that is submitted or that is actually happening, the reality, is all consistent, that it's all aligned. If there are changes in, and we'll do a separate video on when to file an amended petition, but if there are changes in a person's work situation, and when I say a person, I mean here a foreign national employee who's being sponsored on an H or an L or an R or some other visa classification, if there are changes, it would be wonderful. I really highly recommend that you have a conversation with your immigration attorney before those changes take place to see if there's anything that you need to do. And honestly, the answer might be as easy as, oh, you need to update the wage statement, the actual wage statement in the public access file, and that's it. Or the answer might be, hey, I really recommend in this case that you file an amended petition with USCIS. But what you don't want is to have a situation where you have what's called a material change in the terms and conditions of employment. So for example, a change in the job title and job duties, or a significant change in the person's wages, or perhaps going from full-time to part-time or vice versa, and you never address it. You never have that conversation with your immigration lawyer. You never notify USCIS or document in other places those changes, document those changes in places where it needs to be documented. And then months or years later, you realize that you haven't made those changes and you were supposed to have. So be proactive, have that conversation if and when you know that a change like that is coming up. And if you have questions about, is this change material and what do we need to do about it? That's what we're here for. That's what immigration lawyers are here for. We are here to answer those questions and help guide you appropriately depending on the specific situation. So our last kind of section here in this go live is talking about what happens after an FDNS site visit. And the answer is maybe not much, which is good. That's how you want it. So a lot of times clients after a site visit, clients will ask me reasonable question. They'll say, okay, when are we going to hear from them to confirm that everything's okay? And we don't. Most of the time, we really don't hear back from the officer. And that's okay. So they will compile based on their interviews, based on their site visits, emails, phone calls, whatever it is that they do, they will compile a compliance review report and submit that to Department of Homeland Security. There's not a lot of information that I know about that happens after that, but, what happens to that report after that. But if the officer suspects that there's some sort of inconsistency or an issue or perhaps misrepresentation, then it can be escalated. It can go into further investigation, including with ICE perhaps. So that's how you would know that something has gone wrong, if they ask for additional information, and not necessarily wrong. I've seen situations before where they have an initial, site visit, and then they think of another question that they forgot to ask and they send a follow-up email. I'm not saying that. I'm saying if you get notification from ICE that there is inconsistencies in the records, or even perhaps a notice of intent to revoke from USCIS, that could be indication as well. But the majority of the time, it's not good closure. It doesn't feel nice, but the majority of the time we don't hear anything back from USCIS or from the FDNS officer after a site visit. And like I said, it's unpleasant, it's unsettling, because you want closure. You want to have them say, okay, everything looks good, thank you so much. That would be amazing. But they don't do that most of the time. Most of the time we just don't hear back from them and everything is fine. So I hope that you have found this information helpful. As I said, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the comments and I will be happy to answer them if I can. I can't answer fact-specific questions, but I'm happy to help however I can. If you need help with an FDNS site visit or with immigration filings, or if you have questions about the filings, feel free to contact us. Send us an email at info@sumnerimmigration.com, and we're happy to help if we can, or we can set up a time for a consultation depending on the nature of how it is that we might be able to help. I hope that you have found this information helpful. If so, I hope that you will share this video with a friend or a colleague, and make sure that you subscribe to this channel so that you don't miss our next episode. Our next Go Live event will be next Tuesday at noon Eastern. I hope that you will join us for that, and we post videos in the meantime as well. So I hope that you will join us for all of the information that we have available. There are a lot of changes going on, of course, right now, and a lot to talk about in immigration, which isn't necessarily a good thing or pleasant, but we are here to support you. My name is Emily Sumner with Sumner Immigration Law, serving clients throughout the United States and from around the world with employment-based and family-based immigration matters. Until next time.